There are so many subtle, subconscious, more sinister things in our lives that drain our energy and we don't even realise. For years and years and years, I was doing these things and I didn't realise it was draining my energy. I didn't realise it was holding me back from the person that I wanted to become. I didn't realise it was holding me back from the success that I wanted to achieve. And I'm so glad that I have learnt these things now so that I am equipped to catch myself when I'm slipping into these tendencies, when I engage with these kind of people. And I'm so glad I know this now, because honestly, since realizing this, my life has become exceedingly better. I am probably in the best place in my life. I am doing exactly what I want to do. I'm a just happier person. I feel happier in myself. If like 23, 24-year-old Hattie heard that, they'd be so shook. Honestly, I'm going to do this video in 2 parts, by the way. Overall, I'm going to do 8 things that are draining your energy, keeping you stuck, keeping you in one place. But today, in this part 1, I'm going to do 4. And these 4 are so crucial when it comes to maintaining your emotional hygiene, maintaining your energy levels. If you do enjoy this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That really, really helps me out. I am so enjoying building this community of people that care about wellness, spirituality, becoming the best version of themselves. Stick around if you enjoy it, and we'll get into how you're draining your energy, how to maintain your energy, and what is blocking your energy. The first and biggest thing that is blocking your energy is the limiting beliefs. If all of us didn't have so many limiting beliefs, we would take up so many more opportunities, we would put ourselves up for so much more, we would believe in ourselves so much more, we would be able to manifest so much more easily. But the thing is, when we grow up with certain messaging, we end up developing these limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs can be around money. So for example, if you have limiting beliefs about money because you grew up without maybe much of it, or maybe your parents demonize things like debt, you're going to grow up being fearful and having limits around money, and so it's not going to allow you to be financially abundant is one example. If you have limiting beliefs about yourself, for example, maybe you think you're not a very good person, or you think that you are fundamentally damaged, or that you cannot grow, you are standing in your own way because you're limiting yourself to the person that you are now. You're not letting yourself grow. You're stopping yourself in your tracks because you have this belief and narrative in your brain about yourself that means that you can't do certain things, that you cannot be a certain way, you cannot develop into a different person. For example, one way that I have demolished one particular limiting belief is I used to think that I was weak. I used to think that my people pleaser tendencies made me a doormat, made me somebody who wasn't taken seriously. And I feel like I have kind of smashed that limiting belief in the past year, especially because I have actively, and this is how you do it, actively done things that a weak person would not. A weak person would not stand up for themselves or stand up to somebody else being disrespectful. A weak person would continue to be connected to people because they were too scared to stand up to them, say no, walk away from them, because perhaps they were scared of being alone. So for example, I would stand up to people, I would stand my ground, I would be confident in my opinion, or start to anyway. Even though it was uncomfortable and it was really hard, I still did it because I knew that by facing that, I would eventually change the narrative in my head to convince myself that I was actually a strong person, that I could do things that strong people did, that people who had a lot of integrity and good moral standing could do, even though the consequences weren't always pleasant. Standing up for what I think is right, on the internet, when I know that some people might not agree with me, is something that strong people do because they know that they're going to get backlash. They know that people aren't going to agree with them, and they may not be liked, but they do it anyway. And so taking actual action to rewire your brain, to literally just smash that limiting belief, push past that limit that, for example, like I said, I felt like I was a weak person, and doing things that are the opposite of that is rewiring your brain to think differently. And again, unlearning that limiting belief. I had a limiting belief that all debt was bad, that getting into debt, you were signed off, that was it, you're fucked. I have realised in the past 2 years, that's not true. I have utilised debt to help catapult me forward, to help elevate me. Fortunately, I'm no longer in that situation because obviously you need to be careful with debt, But I was convinced that all debt was bad and all debt would result in just catastrophe and it was just bad news. And it's just not the case, not always. Again, go and get financial advice, don't take it from me, but I've realised personally that not all debt is bad, and debt is not inherently bad. It's just can be bad and it can be good. It's like something that we can utilize to our advantage or our disadvantage. It's like neutral rather than like something that's really bad. And that's again a limiting belief that I had to unwind, that it was like more of this neutral thing and it depended how you chose to deal with it rather than inherently a bad thing. And the reason that I say that limiting beliefs are blocking energy is because basically when you have certain limiting beliefs, it limits you, it limits opportunity, it limits your energy. For example, if you're around people that are draining, you're letting your energy deplete because you can't say no, or you have a limit that being without certain people is going to be to your detriment when actually it might liberate you. So for example, same with finances. If I had continued to demonize debt, I wouldn't have been able to utilize it to catapult me forward and benefit me. If you always think that you're one way, it's going to be difficult for you to heal if you're not open to change, if you're not open to the possibility that you could grow. Limiting beliefs block energy, block opportunities, block good things happening to you, and it's something like to be aware of in your own brain. Like, what are your limiting beliefs and how can you combat them? Following on from this then is kind of what I was talking about just then. Keeping around people that are draining, that are energy vampires, that don't have good intentions for you, that are basically not good friends for you, they're not maybe aligned, is draining your energy. Now I can attest to this because in the past year I've, as I kind of talk a lot about on this channel, have had a lot of friendship loss because I recognised that the people that were once in my life were not meant for me. They were draining me. I would come away overthinking, agonising, feeling guilty around my friendships when I really didn't need to. It was a drain. I know that I would not be in the position that I am in terms of my relationship with my partner, my goals, and the success that I've seen in the past sort of 6 months if I had kept around those people. I know that those people would have been pretty judgmental. I know that those people would have expected me at their beck and call. They would have utilised my energy in terms of not only when I was with them, because I'd have to psych myself up to see them, but also when I wasn't with them, I'd be consumed by what they thought about me, whether or not they were good with me or not, or whether or not they were happy with me or not. I don't have to deal with that anymore. My energy is conserved for people that like me for who I am, and it's conserved for people that I know want me to do well and want good things to happen to me, and it's no longer wasted on people that were not right for me, that didn't want good things to happen to me, and that were drains. Energy vampires aren't always like just bad people, of course. Like, they're not necessarily people that are really unkind and quite obviously damaging people, or people that don't have good intentions for you. They can be people that are kind of maybe have a bit of a victim mentality. They're not willing to get out of their own way, and you maybe give them loads of advice and loads of reassurance and guidance, and they still refuse to help themselves. And you get to a point where you're like, you know what, like, I love this person, but I can no longer continue to talk about this issue over and over again if they're not willing to actually do things about it for themselves. So you can have those boundaries with those people. It doesn't mean that they're bad people, it just means that they maybe are a bit negative and they maybe complain a lot, or they kind of just bring the mood down. Like, the moment that you see them, you feel like your body just goes like, ugh. Like, that doesn't make them bad, it just means that maybe they're not aligned with you. You want to get higher, and in fact those people are kind of bringing you down, and that's a perfectly valid thing, that maybe you want to limit your time with them, or you want to maybe walk away from that particular connection with them. And on the more extreme end, people that are not meant for you and who perhaps you've moved on from, because think about it, you're constantly growing, you're constantly somebody who is keen on developing themselves and growing, that some people are fundamentally you're gonna leave behind, and holding on to those connections is actually low-key more painful than just letting it go and just accepting that right now there's just not an alignment with them. I know it can be particularly hard for friends that you've had for a really long time and that you once had like a really thriving relationship with, but what I will say is that the peace that you feel when you feel like you have people around you that are fully for you, that like your authentic self, that are meant for you, is one of the most beautiful feelings ever, because you feel this sense of peace that you can't fathom when you're in that sort of overthinking state of agonizing over what people think about you, whether or not somebody's good with you, whether or not they're not. The peace just allows you again to just liberate yourself, to then focus on things that actually matter to you. People that don't want the best for you, or people that drain you, are going to hold you back without realizing. And I think we never really hear this when we talk about success, when we talk about growth, when we talk about, you know, elevating ourselves. We don't realize that the people around us impact us massively, especially if you're like a highly sensitive person like me. People's energy, the way they treat you, is it really, you do internalize it, and it does have a massive impact on you. So as somebody like this particularly, you cannot afford to have people in your life that drag you down, because you'll overthink. It will consume you more than maybe the average person who is a little bit more sort of like less sensitive. But for sensitive people particularly, it can be a massive drain, and you cannot afford, if you want to grow, if you want to be successful, you cannot afford to utilize or waste your energy on people who really don't deserve it, who really don't make you feel good. You know, I saw this post and it was like, you can tell when somebody's not meant to be around or in your life when it's difficult to be near them. And I couldn't agree with that more. If it's easy to be friends with them, to be in a relationship with them, it's going to just fill you with so much energy, and it's just going to be this sort of continuous cycle of like love, joy, happiness. It's going to just be this like fantastically high vibrational feeling that you have with them. And it's the opposite for people that it's difficult to be friends with. If you feel like you have to be a different version, you have to shrink yourself, you can't talk about, you know, your passions and things that you're excited about. You kind of have to stick to very sort of superficial conversation as opposed to deep conversation. You're having to do so much work just to not be yourself. Like, it takes double the amount of work to not be yourself around people that you feel like you have to change to be around. Like, what's the actual point? The people that you feel like you have to be a shell of yourself, a moderate, like, filtered version of yourself around, is not a good recipe for success and for growth. And it's blocking you more than I can explain. Seriously, the moment that I removed all the wrong people, my life is, I just don't overthink anymore. It's like the peace is so worth not having those people around. The peace is so worth it. And it just clears the way to focus on things that bring you so much joy. I would recommend it to anybody. Really assess who it's easy to be close to and who it's difficult to be close to. And know that unfortunately the people that it's difficult to be close to are impacting your growth, success, and your energy. Now, this one I am so guilty of, for sure, and it's assuming the worst scenario, especially when you have no evidence of that particular scenario that you have kind of jumped to. I'll explain why some of us do this, and it's because we feel like we need to prepare for the worst case scenario. Say if we grew up in a turbulent household, say if we grew up in a place where, you know, you had to adhere to the emotions of your caregiver, it was part of our survival to anticipate the worst case scenario so that we could prepare our body for it. Especially, again, if you're a highly sensitive person, it takes such an emotional toll that it's easier for us, or we think that it makes more sense to emotionally prepare or prepare for the worst, because then at least we're prepared and we're not thrown off, because that's one of the scariest things for us. Having said that, when we get to adulthood, we're no longer in that survival place where we're having to literally do these things in order to survive at home. So when we become adults, it's no longer healthy to jump to the worst case scenario, because that's literally so unlikely. Like, whatever scenario, every time I think about this as well, like every time I've like gone to the worst scenario, it's very rarely happened, and then I'm like, I've wasted all this energy, all this emotional labor on something that was so unlikely to happen. And there are tips and tricks to make sure you're kind of regulating yourself and reassuring yourself. So for example, clocking for a start when you know that you're kind of spiraling, or you know that you're thinking of the worst case scenario. And it's really important to write these things down. If you write down, you know, okay, so if this happens, these will be what I think the consequences are, and then if this happens, this is what I believe the consequences will be, then you can at least rationalize it. Because I think when we don't write stuff down, and I feel like this, when I write stuff down, I always feel like, oh, it's actually not as bad as I thought it was. So being able to clock when you know you're spiraling, when you know you're thinking of the worst case scenario, and being like, cool, right, that might not actually happen, reassuring yourself in your brain and then writing it down will like literally alleviate 50% of your anxiety and 50% of your worry, because you're actually stopping it in its tracks. You're stopping the spiraling in its tracks when you just write it down. If not, you're kind of carrying on down this spiral and you get yourself into a complete tears. But if you can, and I know not everybody's always rational, sometimes, like I said, if we're kind of prepared or we're used to having to think of the worst case scenario, you know, we're basically running on instinct, running on the conditioning. Jumping to the worst case scenario is such a drain. So if we want to conserve our energy, we need to put mechanisms in place that reassure us. You know, talk it through with somebody. Externalizing it is going to really, really help. When, for example, the situation's over and you're relieved and you're like, oh my God, it wasn't the worst situation, make a mental note of that or write it down. What I often do and have been doing recently is when I've thought of the worst case scenario of a particular incident, I make a note of it when it turns out that it was not too bad. I log every single time a situation that I think is going to be catastrophic. I then write it down when it turns out not to be, when it turns out to be okay. So that I can look back and be like, okay, here was it. Do you remember this scenario, Hattie? Well, do you remember you overthought this, but actually this happened? So I can literally refer to that and rewire my brain and, you know, provide myself with evidence of the opposite, provide myself with evidence, written evidence of the opposite happening in so many scenarios. Of course, you might have to go through a few instances where these build up so that you have that evidence, but by having that written thing of like, I thought this was going to happen, but this actually happened, is so helpful, because having that physical reminder rather than relying on your memory to remind you that you don't need to prepare so much is going to give your brain that obvious sign that we don't, or our brain doesn't need to think of the worst case scenario. And it plays into this idea of like focusing on, you know, the ease in the short term instead of focusing on how it's going to actually make your life better in the long term. It is so easy to pick the short term comfort because it's short-term comfort, and it's really difficult to pick the short-term discomfort for the long-term gain. For example, it would have been so much easier for me to continue to stick with the friends that I once had because it was scary to stand up to them. It was scary to hold up my boundaries and stick to my guns and to face insults and to face abandonment and rejection. It's easier not to do that in the short term, but the problem is, in the long term, I would continue to suffer, I would continue to keep people around that weren't right for me, I would continue to feel hurt and rejected anyway. So actually, the short-term discomfort of standing up for myself, setting boundaries, which is really hard because people will reject you, people will be unkind to you, people will no longer find you useful, you realise that people have been in your life for the wrong reasons. The long-term comfort and the long-term beauty of that is that I no longer have to deal with that shit anymore. I am free from people that were not meant for me, and that is the benefit. Just like, you know, for example, with, you know, being consistent in the short term, it's really long and you don't want to do it, it's like annoying and it's hard work, and you don't see the labour, you don't see the fruits of your labour when you do things little and often, because it takes a while for those things to build up. Some people in that moment will be like, well, if I don't get instant gratification, then I'm not going to bother doing it. The problem with that is they're picking the easy short term, because in the long term, they may not, you know, feel fulfilled because they never kind of really went for it with their dream. They may not sort of be able to find financial freedom because they never kind of stuck at something. However, the people that choose the short-term discomfort, grinding, you know, spending all your time on your craft, missing out on social events, people not understanding you, not making much money initially, being consistent even when you don't feel like it, showing up for yourself even when you don't feel like it. Think about the long-term benefits that they gain from sticking with it. They find financial freedom, they liberate themselves from maybe the corporate world, the 9 to 5, capitalism, whatever it might be. They liberate themselves to do exactly what they want on their terms. Yeah, like get to live a life where they get to work or make money from their passion. It's always the same thing. You know, pick your hard. Are you going to pick the hard thing right now, which is standing up for yourself, setting boundaries, missing nights out, working on your craft even when you can't see any results or fruit from it, and then getting the long-term benefit? Or are you going to pick the short-term ease now, which is like staying silent, not standing up for yourself because you're scared of them, and then they are still, you know, accepting of you? Are you going to go out with your friends you know, carry on doing something that you absolutely hate because it's too scary to take the leap and take a risk and do something that you actually want to do. Think about it, pick your hard, which one is it going to be? So things will over time drain your energy if essentially you do not pick the short-term discomfort. And I know it's not something that many of us want to hear, including myself, but when you pick the short-term discomfort that you know is going to reap the long-term gain, you save so much energy in the long run. Again, to conserve for your, you know, you have to do a bit of a big energy push and draining your energy in the short term, but in the long term, you are conserving your energy. Whereas when you pick the short-term discomfort, yeah, you might be saving your energy momentarily, but that will build up over a long stretch of time where you continually have your energy drained for the long term. Fuck that. I know that I would not choose that anymore. And now that I know this, yeah, absolutely. It's draining your energy when you pick the short-term ease. Like I said, that can be what I've just said, you know, doing the healing work and seeing things as challenges, just going for it and just like facing the challenge, facing what the universe has sent you to face. Doing it and facing the music in the short term will have just the most beautiful outcome in the long term, even if it doesn't feel like it in that moment. Even if you can't see how this is going to benefit you in the moment, it will when you pick what you know is right to do and you do the right thing for you. It's going to benefit you so much, and it's going to give you so much energy and leave you with so much more energy to spend on things that really matter to you. My final thing for part 1 of what's gonna be draining your energy is avoiding challenges, obstacles, and focusing on doing what's easy in the short term, and then it's causing sort of long-term problems. Challenges are hard. They are here for us to grow. They're an opportunity for us to grow. And if we do not rise to the challenge, it can further down the line cause the same challenge to come up over and over again, which is going to drain us. So for example, for a very long time, I was unwilling to heal my relationship with certain men. So the same type of man would come over and over and over again, come into my life, and the same experience would be repeated over and over again. And this is what can happen, is if you do not see discomfort as an opportunity to grow, and the same with healing, you know, if you avoid healing, you are signing yourself up for a hard life in the future, because all that's going to happen, you're going to continue to get triggered, you're going to continue to experience and re-experience the same discomfort and hurt over and over again on a cycle, and you will never escape it. However, if you see challenges and healing as an opportunity to actually liberate yourself from the cycles and the negative cycles that you find yourself in, it will liberate you. And I can attest to this again, is that through my healing my relationship with men, I got to a point where I was like, something has to change. I can control my behavior, so something has to change. Only when I recognized it as I have to change, I have to see this as a challenge and an opportunity to grow, did it mean that I no longer suffered in terms of my relationship with men. Anyway, that is it for part 1. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you took some value from it as well. Part 2 will be out next week, and there's some really fantastic ones in there as well. There's like 2 big ones that I feel like has significantly changed my energy levels. I feel so much more free and liberated because of these things, so definitely look out for part 2. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps me out. I do appreciate it so much. I'm so excited to build this community, and follow me on TikTok as well if you like all things self-development, self-help, navigating relationships with people. It's all on my TikTok, so definitely go and check that out. But anyway, with that is it for part 1, and I will see you in part 2. Bye.